The Paul George era in Philadelphia has gotten off to an underwhelming start, to say the least. In the first year of his 4-year max contract, one has to wonder if things will get better. And with Jimmy Butler causing a scene down in Miami at the exact right time, could Daryl Morey look to swap out the two stars and right his wrongs from the offseason? I do want to dive into this and explore this with a little more credence than I've given it to this point. I've been pretty open about being kind of negative about Jimmy Butler on this channel, that I do believe the half a season that he spent in Philadelphia is remembered a lot more fondly than is the actuality. But with the recent struggles from Paul George, do want to explore what exactly this would look like and what I think is at risk beyond just the deal. So let's dive right into things. And I will say right up front here, I'm more open to this conversation than I've been at any point this year. That my level of concern for Paul George specifically is certainly at the highest point it has been all season. That we now have over a 20-game sample size. I believe 24 games is that what he's played, even while missing the Wizards game. That we've seen what he can bring to the table. And to kind of touch on the stats as a whole, we'll start off right here with Paul George, that he has averaged 16.2 points per game, 5.6 rebounds, 4.6 assists, shot 41.4% from the field, 33.5% from three. But what is particularly frustrating to me about Paul George is I get we have not seen the necessary sample size of the trio of him with Tyrese Maxey and with Joel Embiid. But what is becoming clear is Paul George is not capable of elevating this offense in the nights in which Joel Embiid is not here, which is a huge reason why the signing made sense to me. So with that said, let's take a look at what the situation is down in Miami. Now, like is always the case with Jimmy Butler, things have escalated rather quickly. Now, Jimmy has not had the most stellar performance on the floor this year either. He's averaging 17.6 points per game, 5.5 rebounds, 4.7 assists, shooting 55.2% from the field, 37.5% from three, shooting 45% from the corner. But what I will say is every time I've checked in on a Miami Heat game, selective would be a nice way to put his offensive approach. That there have been far more nights, especially of late, where he's totally comfortable just sitting on the perimeter and really doing nothing on either side of the ball. Now, stats don't lie, and that's obviously what his season-long output comes out to. But what I think is always important to note of this, we're walking into the Jimmy Butler situation, in which Sixers fans should be quite familiar with what it is. Now, to dive into the level of interest, I first want to start off with this report from Evan Sidri here, who says none of Jimmy Butler's other preferred destinations, the Mavericks, the Rockets, the Warriors, are showing interest in trading for him ahead of the deadline. The Suns are the only team eagerly awaiting a chance to bring aboard Butler and reward him with a 2-year, $112.6 million extension. And to take it a step further, we got a report from Chris Haynes saying that a few teams have been informed not to trade for Miami Heat star Jimmy Butler. So the posturing of send me to any of the other 29 teams outside of the Miami Heat and I will make them a contender, that seems to be out the window for Jimmy Butler. But what I do think is important to note here is that is the reality of the situation. Jimmy Butler wants to get paid. Sure, he can talk about his basketball joy. Sure, he can talk about needs a change of scenery, clashing with Pat Riley, whatever the case may be. The reality is the root of this issue is Jimmy Butler wants a contract and Pat Riley is unwilling to give it to him. That is the case in just about every single one of these. That was the issue and where the James Harden situation fell through here in Philadelphia the first time. While guys can dress it up and put it in different ways, that is really what's going on. And to add further evidence of this, we did get this from Brian Windhorst here saying, quote, Jimmy Butler isn't going to extend with any team. And so because teams know that, they're offering the Heat right now the poo-poo platter. There's only one team that is ready to pay Jimmy Butler exactly what he wants, and that's the Phoenix Suns. Now, despite the Suns recently basically destroying the Sixers, I would put it. That's a little strong, but regardless, they took it to him in the second half there. Despite that, they look like a team that could use an injection of life. And that is what Jimmy Butler is to me at this point in his career. I think if you're making this trade, what you're really speaking into existence here is that one run with quote-unquote playoff Jimmy can be enough for this deal to be worth it. I don't know if that is the case for the Suns, but I do know they're desperate enough to try it. When looking at the case from the Sixers team, it does feel like they need a little bit of spark of something. Now, the problems with this Sixers team are prevalent. There aren't just one fix-all that you throw Jimmy Butler on as the Band-Aid and all of a sudden this team is back to its championship aspirations. But what the angle would be from a Philadelphia perspective, I think is probably more motivated to not re-sign Jimmy Butler. That I think would be looked at as, let's take a backtrack of this contract here, which of course is Paul George's contract. And to dive into that exactly, we have as far as the Paul George conversation, that we do have his contract looking like this: $49.2 million this year, $51.6 million next year, 54 the following, and then 56 in 27-28. That is a lot of money to give to a guy who currently doesn't even look like a number 3 option on the Sixers team. Now, granted, in fairness to Paul George, it has been a rocky road to this point. Obviously, Joel Embiid has missed a ton of games. He's only played 13 to this point. That Paul George himself has battled 2 knee bone bruises. The lineups around him have constantly been switching. There's been a lot of moving parts within the Sixers organization, but one of the benefits of Paul George is that he is this plug-and-play player. You put him in any situation with any teammates, he should be able to make things happen, and it really hasn't been the case this year. Now, for Jimmy specifically, I also want to note here that we don't know what the relationship is behind the scenes at this point. It obviously was a completely different group of decision makers for the Sixers team during his first time in Philadelphia. And what the clash was at this point, despite the Tobias Harris overmade conversations, what it really came down to was Ben Simmons versus Jimmy Butler. And more or less, who was the point guard, who wanted the ball in their hands. Now, granted, we see what the test of time has proven there, that Ben Simmons is doing what he's doing while Jimmy Butler, even with his flaws, still competing at a high level and has taken a team to 2 finals down there in Miami. I do get why things went down, and I think we brush it up as more of a simplistic issue than is the reality when we look up the breakup in the past, that I understand if you flash back to that time, believing in the 23-year-old all-star who had just made his first performance, was still peaking and learning to play his best basketball. You can't argue the potential that Ben Simmons once had, but what was accurate in the standpoint of Jimmy is he never had it in here. He never had the desire to get better, the will, the heart, however you want to put it. The reality is he is, the Iron Man there, that the guy that doesn't have a heart inside of him, or the Tin Man is what I was looking for there from Wizard of Oz. But for this specifically with the Sixers team, what I think people are underselling the risk is the optics behind things. That for Paul George specifically, he signed on the dotted lines to come to Philadelphia as the premier free agent, the number 1 free agent in this year's class. When is the last time that has happened in Philadelphia across any sports, really? Maybe Bryce Harper in baseball, but to stick it with the Sixers, they don't get these top-tier free agents. So what does that say to the rest of the league from a reputation standpoint if less than half a season since Paul George had signed that agreement there, that he's already being shipped out of the organization, and that Daryl Morey is asking for a redo? And to take it a step further here, who's to say Miami has any interest in this? I understand that Jimmy's causing quite a few headaches down there, but are they signing up to take on that level of contract? It seems like the crux of the issue between Butler and the organization is about giving him money in the twilight years of his career. Well, that's exactly what the Sixers signed up to do with Paul George. And Bradley Beal is the clear, hurdle that needs to be passed in this situation. That if they can reroute that contract, because it's a quote-unquote non-starter, according to Shams Charania, for Beal being sent down to Miami, if they can find a way to reroute his contract and send him to another team, then the deal will get done. Then that would make me confident that Jimmy ends up in Phoenix and everyone can take a deep breath. But also the question comes to my mind of where does the Bradley Beal contract compared to Paul George? I understand Paul is still a better player at this current point, although Bradley Beal looked quite nice in his off-the-bench role, dropping 30 against the Sixers team last night. So will Miami blink from the standpoint of putting themselves in the same situation? I don't know the answer to any of these questions. I will say it's worth a phone call from Daryl Morey's perspective, but I think the reality is these Sixers are stuck, man. They are in the spot. They have put themselves in this position, and while Jimmy may be capable of elevating this team in a way that Paul George has not, I just don't see a world where Miami sees things the same way. At the minimum, I think the Sixers would be looking at sort of a separate conversation where they're doing the same dance as Phoenix, where they're sending Paul George to another destination. That what Miami would want would probably be a Jared McCain center package, and I don't love the optics of that by any means. And I think the reality is the Sixers are just in a bad spot, that they may have purchased a lemon in Paul George, and they have to keep figuring out if that is the case. You got to see it through at this point. If Jimmy is mysteriously able to come to Philadelphia in a deal that, could be on the table here, I certainly would entertain it. I think it's worth having the conversation with Joel Embiid specifically, and that would be the opinion that I value the most, because if you do get one championship run, let's walk through it and play it out, that if you're able to get one run where you have playoff Jimmy playing for that contract, you maybe can get an injury luck and Joel Embiid can, suit up for at least the majority of the playoff games, and then you let Jimmy walk. Then all of a sudden, the transition of this organization, we are building around Tyrese Maxey and Jared McCain. Maybe you do get Joel for half the games where you can, lean on him as a big man presence. things like that are an option. None of these are the direct perfect route for this Sixers team. I'll make that crystal clear that this is all a little bit of coping and all a little bit of just hoping for the best. But the reality is the Sixers have dug themselves in a little bit deeper hole than I think any of us thought were possible. And now they are trying to get desperate to fix it. So we'll see if there are any more rumors connecting him to Jimmy Butler. But I do want to hear from you guys. If that opportunity is on the table, would you take that? Or do you believe it is not worth the amount of organizational risk that Jimmy Butler inherently carries and the message that it would send by moving on from Paul George this quickly? Drop your thoughts below. Appreciate each and every one of you guys tuning in as always. Make sure you're smashing that subscribe button if you have not already. Drop a like on this video here. I'll be back talking to you next time right here on Sixers Digest. Peace.